My name is Miriam, if you've never been here before. If you have, you know what the fuck's going on. I'm not gonna beat around the bush. We all know why we have gathered here today. This video is gonna be very, very unnecessarily long as it is, so let's just get right to it. So in today's video, I am going to be reviewing the entire Shadowhunters Chronicles by Cassandra Clare, or as I like to call it, the Shadowhunter literary universe. So before I get to the actual reviews, I do want to give a little bit of backstory on what the Shadowhunter Chronicles is, when it came about, what is it actually about, how many books are in it, what are the different series, all of that I'm going to briefly summarize. If you already know everything that you need to know about Cassandra Clare, I will put a timestamp on the screen right now, and I will have a lot of timestamps in the description of this video so you can go where you think you need to go in this video. So the Shadowhunters Chronicles is a culmination of a couple of different series by Cassandra Clare, all set in the same universe. The Shadowhunters Chronicles started in 2007 with the release of the Mortal Instruments Book 1, City of Bones. This is a series that is about a character named Clary, and she is discovering the world of Shadowhunters. A Shadowhunter is someone who is half angel and half human, and they have descended from the angels, and their mandate is kind of to be the cops of the fantasy realm. Their purpose is to kill demons that are trying to infiltrate the mortal world, and also to keep all of the other magical creatures in line and make sure that they follow the rules and the law. The magical creatures and communities that actually make up this fantasy realm are werewolves, vampires, fairies, and warlocks. And Shadowhunters are just basically the top of the tier, and they are kind of ruling over all of these different communities in ways that is explored in all of the series, some good, some not so good. And all of the books and all of the series kind of explore how all of these communities communicate and all of the interworkings of their relationships with each other. Shadowhunters have these kind of headquarters where they meet at and live at called institutes. And at these institutes, they have families who live there, and they also have traveling Shadowhunters who come there to train or to stay or whatever. They have a lot of these in like every major city and in every continent and in a lot of major countries, basically. The Mortal Instruments series is set at the New York Institute. So as I said, all of this began with the Mortal Instruments series. All of this was established in that series. It is a 6-book series, but it was originally a trilogy, so it is technically 2 different trilogies that kind of follow 2 different but same storyline. This was our first introduction into the Shadowhunter world. It was our first introduction into what it was, what's going on, what we could really expect from it. After the Mortal Instruments series, we have the Infernal Devices. The Infernal Devices series is set in 1880s London, and it is set at the London Institute. This is obviously a prequel to the Mortal Instruments series, so even though it was released after it, it does take place way before it, and all of the events that happen in the Infernal Devices series are extremely important, and basically everything in the entire Shadowhunters Chronicles to this day hinges on the events of the Infernal Devices. Next up, in order of how they were released, we have the Dark Artifices series. This is the most recent completed Shadowhunters series. This series follows immediately after the Mortal Instruments series. It's set 5 years later in 2012, and it is set at the LA Institute. In the Dark Artifices, we follow a cast of characters that were shown to us and introduced to us in the very last Mortal Instruments book, where we saw them as children, and now we see them a little bit more grown up, and we follow them as they are kind of dealing with the aftermath of the Mortal Instruments series. The last and most recent book that has been published in the Shadowhunters Chronicles is Chain of Gold, and that is the first book in the Last Hours trilogy, which follows about 20 years after the Infernal Devices trilogy. So it is another prequel, it's another flashback in time, in history, in the Shadowhunter world, and it explores the children of the characters from the Infernal Devices series. Some of them are related, some are not, but they have all grown up together and they all have established relationships with each other, and it's really interesting. So if you want to know the correct order to read the Shadowhunters Chronicles in, I don't have an answer for you. I will provide a video by the queen of the Shadowhunters, Emma Books. She did an entire video about different orders to read the Shadowhunters Chronicles in. But what I will say is, if you watch my videos and if you feel like you kind of align with some of the things that I talk about, some of my ideals, some of my thoughts on books or anything like that, I will tell you what order that I read it in. So I did read the first couple of books in the Mortal Instruments series a long time ago. They were well beyond my memory and I never really saw myself coming back to the series, but last year I was really hearing a lot about the Infernal Devices, and the things that I was hearing made me think that maybe this is the one Cassandra Clare series that is maybe my style. It kind of had some of the elements that I like to read about, so I decided to give the Infernal Devices a chance. So I would call that my first foray into the Shadowhunter realm. I do think that since the Infernal Devices trilogy is chronologically the first in the entire Shadowhunters Chronicles and everything else kind of hinges off of that, I do think that it is a very good introduction into the series. It is a very character driven trilogy, so keep that in mind. A lot of the following books are very plot driven, and in my opinion, I would say that Cassandra Clare definitely finds a balance of character and plot later on. So I started with the Infernal Devices, then I read the entire Mortal Instruments series, and then I just so happened to finish City of Heavenly Fire, the last book, a couple of days after Chain of Gold came out. So I was so excited to read Chain of Gold, so I just read it after the Mortal Instruments series. That is really strange, but to be honest with you, I don't think that it was a bad idea, because there are characters from the Infernal Devices in the Mortal Instruments series, and they play a really big role at the very end of the series. So kind of going back to the time when they were introduced and back to their time that they originated in, it was kind of just like watching a show and then witnessing a flashback. So I really enjoyed the experience of going from the Mortal Instruments straight into Chain of Gold, and then after Chain of Gold I went straight into the Dark Artifices. So that is the order that I read the books in. It worked out for me. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that order. I would probably recommend that you read Dark Artifices before Chain of Gold, because I definitely think that that would be beneficial, but it's up to you. I'm literally already sweating just from that, and I haven't even started the reviews yet, so this should be really fun. Okay, so let's get into the reviews. I have 13 books to review, so I'm gonna try to make this as quick as humanly possible. I have all of my notes right here. My plan is to review all of these books in the order that I read them. I'll give you my star rating, I'll give you some thoughts on the book. Some books I'm gonna talk a little bit more at length about than others, and you'll see why later. And then after I finish reviewing every book in a series, I'll give you some overall thoughts on the series as a whole. And yeah, let's go. So first up, book 1 in the Infernal Devices, Clockwork Angel. I rated this book 4 out of 5 stars. I feel like I should just put it out there that I went into this series with preconceived notions of already loving it. I knew a little bit about the characters already. I knew a little bit about their dynamic together. I knew about the love triangle. I love love triangles, and this is probably the best executed one like ever. So, and I'm a very character driven person. I love when characters do nothing but just sit and talk. and get to know each other and build relationships with each other. That's my favorite thing. I don't care about a plot. I don't care if they even don't step foot outside. I don't really give a shit. So just putting that out there for why I love this series so much. But anyways, book one, it was cute, you know. I felt like it was an adequate introduction to the series. We come into the Shadowhunter world in that very typical hero's journey manner, where we find our main protagonist thrown into the world and we kind of learn as they learn. We learn through Tessa's eyes about the Shadowhunters and how their inner workings are working in the 1800s, and it is all very, you know, Victorian and English. It's a very atmospheric book. It depends a lot on the style of the day, of the time, and I don't know, it was a good introduction. They had, you know, their little adventures and whatnot, but I wouldn't say that too much happens in this first book other than a lot of introducing happening. Book two, Clockwork Prince, I rated this book 5 out of 5 stars. Book one was good, but as I said, it was just missing that little bit of something, and that something was depth to the characters. A lot of introducing was happening in book one, but in this book, literally nothing happened except for character building and relationship building, and we just got to know these characters so well through scenes of them just talking to one another. So obviously I was in my element. This book is very emotional. It had a huge emotional impact on me because of just how much we were learning about these characters and what they've been through, and like the obstacles that they had gone through in their past and that they were going through in their present. A lot of the enjoyment that the reader gets from this series, from the emotional impact that the characters are having on you. So if you don't like character-driven books, you're probably not going to feel too moved by the books in this series, but I just have to say that I completely was. And yeah, book three, Clockwork Princess, 5 out of 5 stars. Once again, if I could have given it more, I would have. This is the best conclusion to a series that I have ever read. It is the most emotional. No, it's not. I wouldn't say the book by itself is the most emotional thing that I've ever read, but the impact on me was the most emotional that I've ever been while reading a book. It's the most I've ever cried and like literally mourned while reading a book. And I'm not sure how I just completely missed any spoilers in the 10 years it has been since this series has been out, but I didn't have any spoilers for the end of the series, and I feel like most people at this point do, and that kind of sucks, but it's just so beautiful. The ending is one of the most satisfying but bittersweet and heartbreaking endings that I've ever read in my life, and I just truly don't think that anything else in this world is going to make me feel exactly how this book made me feel. I haven't said anything about the actual content of the book, but once again, it's just a lot more of diving deeper into the relationships of the 3 main characters in this series, and I just love the 3 of them so much, and it was just amazing to see what became of them in the end. There's a little bit more plot and action in this book than there was in the second one, so if you kind of like the first book and then don't really like the second book, I think you'll definitely pick back up on the third book a little bit more. I love this book. It's one of my favorite books of all time. Will I ever reread it? Probably not, at least until I have healed, which I don't know if I ever will, but yeah. So my overall thoughts on the Infernal Devices as it is by itself is that it is just a beautiful series. It's very poetic, and I'm just gonna quote something here that I heard from Hannah from A Clockwork Reader in her recent Chain of Gold video. She said something about the Infernal Devices that a lot of people feel like it's boring, but she liked it, and I also like it because it's not overcomplicated. Like, there's not too many things happening, which some of Cassandra Clare's later books definitely suffer from. There's not too much happening. There's a very clear sequence of events going on that the characters have to work through, and it feels appropriate for the time that it's set in my opinion, and it's just It's perfect in my eyes, but I know it's not gonna be perfect for everyone else. Moving on to the Mortal Instruments series, starting with book 1, City of Bones. So this book is iconic. I rated City of Bones 3 out of 5 stars, which you would know if you watched my video entitled I Finally Read 3 YA Staples. That's what it's called. I will link it up here somewhere and also in the description. And go watch that if you haven't, because I give a lot more fresher thoughts on City of Bones in that video, but I gave it 3 stars. Here's the thing. City of Bones is the only book by Cassandra Clare that I can certifiably say that I have nostalgia for. I have nostalgia attached to that book because I read it in like 2000 something, 11 or 12, I don't remember. I read it before I saw the movie. I saw the movie in the theaters, and it was just a whole era. Like, it was an experience. It was a time to be alive. Felt like before I opened the book, I didn't really remember anything. But once I read that opening sequence in the club where Clary sees Jace and Isabel and Alec killing a demon in the middle of the club, and she realizes that she's not supposed to be seeing them because no one else sees them, it is so iconic, and it will go down as one of the most iconic opening sequences ever. Like, I don't care. Other than that iconicness, I feel like this is a pretty solid introduction into what to expect from the Mortal Instruments series in particular. For the time that it came out, which was the mid to late 2000s, this was really shaking up the scene, you know? This was shaking up the scene in YA. I mean, YA was really kind of getting off the ground at this time, and it really brought urban fantasy from the adult genre over to the up and coming new wave young adult genre. And it did what it had to do in that respect. Book 2, City of Ashes, 2 out of 5 stars. Firstly, I just want to say electric chair. Cassandra Clare was on some shit when she wrote this one. This is where the video is really gonna take off, because I have a lot of things boiling under my skin, and they've been boiling under my skin. So let's just talk through this one, shall we? So obviously, at the end of City of Bones, we have the infamous incest reveal. We know this, we have heard it all before, but the one thing that I will say about City of Bones and like that kind of cliffhanger that it leaves you off on is that Jace and Clary, when they find out that they are full-on blood brother and sister, like they find out to their knowledge that they have the same mother and father. I'm just making this as clear as possible. When they both find that out in City of Bones, after they've been kind of flirting with each other the whole time, they've made out a couple of times throughout the book, they find that out. They are very hurt and confused and disgusted, at least on Clary's part. They're definitely feeling a lot of emotions, and they're both like 15, 16 years old, and they just are kind of just, they don't really know where to go from here. And that's where we leave off in the first book. Okay, cool. I find that that reaction is plausible. I won't say completely accurate, but I find that reaction plausible. So then we move on to City of Ashes. So let's unpack this. There is a scene in this book, I would say within the first either quarter or half of this book, where Jace, Clary, and the gang have to go to the fairy court. They go underground to this fairy court. This is our introduction into the world of the fairies. And if you know anything about fairies, you know that if you eat a fairy fruit while you're in the fairy world, then you will be stuck there until they release you, which they probably never will. So while they're in the fairy court, Clary, of course, accidentally eats a fairy fruit, and the fairy queen is very amused, and she's like, okay, well, she has to stay here, but the rest of y'all can go. So obviously the crew is not looking to leave Clary there, so they're like, okay, so what do we have to do to get you to let her go? Fairy queen then tells Clary that she can leave if she kisses the person in the room that she desires most. This is where I will also just casually sprinkle in that her boyfriend Simon is also in the room. I will pause and I will let you just try to guess who she desires most in the room. It's Jace. So they have a very, very steamy makeout. Like, it is a detailed, steamy makeout on the fairy court floor before everyone. And this isn't even all. Before the makeout happens, Simon, Clary's best friend slash boyfriend, is the voice of reason in the room. And he's like, well, there's no way that y'all are gonna make out because y'all are brother and sister, right? Like, this is definitely not gonna happen. And Isabel, who is Jace's adoptive sister, says, well, we have to get out of here, so they should just kiss and get it over with. And then Simon says, but you wouldn't kiss your brother, so why should they kiss? And Isabel says, I'm not kidding, y'all. Isabel says something to the effect of, if it were this situation and it were the only thing that I could do, I would. I just don't know. So after the makeout, Simon storms off. Jace and Clary and the rest of the gang go back to the New York Institute. And there's another scene literally following the makeout scene where Jace and Clary are in Jace's room and he's like in the bathroom running the shower, but then he like shows up in the doorway of the bathroom and the steam is coming out from behind him and his jeans are hanging low on his waist, and I'm so uncomfortable. I don't get it. I need someone to go to jail for this. The highlight of City of Ashes for me was Simon becoming a vampire, which was something that I remembered from the beginning. And the best scene in the book was a scene where he drank Jace's blood. And I will not be elaborating on that. Book 3, City of Glass. 3 out of 5 stars. This was perhaps one of the most batshit crazy books I've ever read in my life. It was a roller coaster ride. I felt like I had read 10 books by the time that I was finished with that book. I felt so many feelings at the end of that book that I just didn't know what to do with any of them, and I just gave it a very middle of the road rating. Also, another reason for that rating is because some of the things in this book are even worse than the offenses made in City of Ashes. Clary and Jace do find out in this book that they are not at all related. Like, neither their mother nor their father are the same, but a lot of things happen before that reveal that are just so bad, so uncomfortable, so messy. That's the word that we need for this series, messy. Obviously, those uncomfortable scenes were a 1 star for me. I was really not feeling well. I was feeling quite sick of the bullshit. But then we move into the second half of the book, and the action sequences and everything happening was just really, really doing it for me for some reason. And even though everything was just so crazy, it was the most fun time that I had had in a while. And I was just having so much fun flipping those pages and just wanting to see like what was going to end up happening, because I did not know anything that was going to happen in this series after like the second book. This was Cassandra Clare's first conclusion to any series that she had published, and I find that most of her conclusions have followed this formula of being as epic as this one, or just being completely epic in general. Book 4, City of Fallen Angels, 1 star. It's really, really fitting that I go from raving about a Cassandra Clare book to rating the next one in the series 1 star. I feel like that is definitely my relationship with her as an author. So City of Fallen Angels is the first book that I've ever in my life rated 1 star. Should I have possibly rated books 1 star in the past? Maybe so, but I haven't felt that vitriol. I haven't felt that need in my heart. I haven't really felt that before. I hate this book. This is probably the worst book I've ever read. It completely was a waste of my time. I wish I could get that like 350 pages of my life back, but I cannot. I will start out by saying that nothing of substance happened in this book, but the little bit that did occur was a display of disgustingly toxic relationship drama that is quite frankly very problematic, very much something that I felt uncomfortable and annoyed reading. It was just very, very obnoxious drama, but also it was more serious than that in some cases. There was one relationship that kind of was introduced in this book that was straight up abusive, and it was very much glorified, and it was so bad, so bad. I don't know what Cassandra was thinking. She does rectify it in a future book, but I don't know. I don't know why this book exists, and I wish it didn't. Book 6, City of Lost Souls. I rated this book 3.5 stars. City of Lost Souls is a very, very interesting book because it is the first book in the series that I felt like I saw a peak of elements that are interesting to me right now, that I don't have to kind of, qualify the book in my mind like, okay, this was written in 2000 whatever, and I guess for that time, for my taste back then and everyone's tastes and standards back then, okay, maybe this is good. This is the first book in the series where I felt like I was seeing some elements that interested me right now as an adult in 2020. In the grand scheme of the whole series, it was the book where we kind of slowed things down from all of the breakneck drama and action that was usually going on in this book, because it's a very plot-driven series in general. So this book in particular was really, really pushing the brakes and kind of taking a little bit more time to focus on things that might have been lost in the previous drama and action of the previous trilogy. This book also kind of switched up the dynamics. We were introduced to a lot of different group dynamics in this book in particular, because Clary and Jace were finally separated from everyone else group that they usually hang out and do hijinks with. They were separated from them in this book, and they were somewhere else, and that group was kind of doing errands to try to find out where they were and how to get them back. So we definitely got some page time and some development between the characters in an environment where they weren't being overtaken by Jace and Clary, and I personally really, really loved that. Also, on the other side of things with Jace and Clary and Sebastian, which is the antagonist in this series, or in this part of the series, we definitely got some interesting looks at kind of gray morality. Got a look at Sebastian that made him so much more terrifying, but also so much better of a villain. We really got some scenes that were very chilling. I will say that there is, for people who haven't read the series and maybe want to, that there is an attempt at sexual assault in this book. It's in the latter half of the book, and it's between two characters in an apartment where they just had a fight. So if you're going to read this book and you feel like you want to skip on that, look out for that. But all in all, this is the book that really started to kind of bring me back into the experience. And instead of enjoying it in a trashy sense, I actually started to enjoy some parts of it in a very serious way. I guess. Book 6, City of Heavenly Fire. I rated this book 5 out of 5 stars. So this is the conclusion to the Mortal Instruments series, the entire series. There was already a kind of conclusion, then we started back up, but this is the real conclusion to the story of Jace and Clary and all of them. Obviously, they're still in the future books, but they play very much a smaller role. I didn't go into this series as a whole with any kind of hate towards it. I was really going into these books open-minded for each new book. Even though I never planned to read The Mortal Instruments, I never planned to like it or enjoy it, I obviously was still opening each book with optimism and everything, but I did not expect to rate a Mortal Instruments book 5 out of 5 stars. But this was an amazing conclusion. As I said for City of Glass, Cassandra Clare usually knows how to write a conclusion to a series. I say usually for future reference. But this book was just so epic, and it was so action-packed, and it was just doing things that I really, really wanted the entire series to do. Like, this book in particular is what I wanted the entire Mortal Instruments series to be. And I think that this book and the energy that it had, if the Mortal Instruments had been written maybe like 5 years later than it was, like, the entire series would have had the energy that this book had. But I don't want to say for sure that it was worth having read 5 books before it to get to this 5-star excellence, but like, that's kind of what it felt like, because you never really know, would it have landed as well if you wouldn't have gone through what you went through before? You know what I'm saying? So it's very interesting, but this book was just excellent. I enjoyed every minute of it. I stayed up until like 3 a.m. one night to finish it. I loved the characters that were introduced in this book. From the beginning, we kind of get introduced to a whole different institute, which turns out to be the LA Institute, and it turns out to be Emma and Julian and the Blackthorns, who are the main cast of the Dark Artifices. So we get to know them as their 12-year-olds in this book, and we get to know more about their family. And then it really, really sets up the Dark Artifices in such a big way, because everything in that series clearly hinges on the traumatic events that they go through in this last book of this series. So I really, really enjoyed those elements of it. But even just everything with Jace and Clary, I found them more tolerable in this book. I found them to be, you know, not as annoying as I had felt, because I haven't really talked about what I felt about their relationship this entire book series. I've just been talking about the books in general, but I just did not care for Jace and Clary. They made me very uncomfortable most of the time. I couldn't really wrap my head around their relationship dynamic, and overall, just as characters, they weren't really, I felt like I was being told about how great they were, and I didn't really feel that in my heart. I didn't really see what great warriors that they were, and I didn't really care overall. But in this book, I felt for the first time that they were who they were being talked up to be by others in the books. I felt like I was really seeing that potential for their characters, and I just wish that they had been that way the entire time, but whatever. But yeah, amazing book, amazing conclusion. The epilogue made me cry. Cassandra knows how to write an epic epilogue. Overall thoughts on the Mortal Instruments series. This series really put me through the ringer, and even for all of the uncomfortable moments that I was feeling and just laughing at how crazy and unabashed some of the antics are, it was the most exciting and fun, like genuinely fun reading experiences that I have had since I was a teenager. I feel like sometimes we get a little bit too wrapped up in the books that we're reading. We get a little bit too wrapped up in our egos, and we try to look at what we think is below our standards in books. We just kind of start to look at things very, very negatively. And just to like sit back and read an entire series and just read all of the very, very trashy, problematic scenes, but also see how it progressed and how it very much improved over time, just like we do as people. It was like I'm not trying to get all like metaphysical here or whatever, but it was very interesting. It was a fun time. I don't know what else to say. Like, I just really had fun. And it was also just really interesting to see Cassandra Clare's progression as a writer, and not only in her writing style, but in the actual like world that she had built. You could tell that throughout the series, throughout the 6 books, she was really discovering new things within her own creation. For example, the Parabatai bond. As I had read the Infernal Devices before the Mortal Instruments, I really was feeling that the parabatai bond in the Mortal Instruments was like very, very weak between Jace and Alec. Like they just really didn't have the connection that Will and Jem had, at least in the first 3 books. I just wasn't really feeling that parabatai bond, but then in the latter 3 books, they really, really stepped up as parabatai, and you could really see their emotional connection to one another. And it's just little details like that. Like you could really tell that by writing another series in the same world, Cassandra was able to flesh out another series. And yeah, it's interesting stuff. Okay, so now let's talk about Chain of Gold, which is the first book in the Last Hours series, which is the sequel to the Infernal Devices series. It's set in early 1900s London once again, and we're following the children of the cast of characters from the Infernal Devices. So I've actually done a review of Chain of Gold, but it is very much spoilery, so I would not watch that video if you haven't read it already. But I rated this book 5 out of 5 stars, and it might just be my favorite Shadowhunters book. And let me explain why. So the Infernal Devices is my favorite Shadowhunters series, and that definitely is the truth, but I feel like the Last Hours series is maybe going to take its place because I just enjoyed Chain of Gold so much that it actually scares me. And I definitely think that that could have something to do with how this is my first Cassandra Clare Shadowhunters series that I'm actually here for, and I got to be here for the excitement, the build up, the hype, and I got to be there on release day. I got to go to Barnes & Noble and buy it before quarantine, and I got to read it along with everyone else and see everyone rating it 5 stars, and it was just a lot of excitement. But I have enough confidence in myself to believe that that's not the only thing that would make me like a book. My enjoyment of this book really stemmed from 2 things. So firstly, definitely it is because of my love for the Infernal Devices already. I will say that I did go into this book thinking that I would be really sad because obviously that cast of characters are old and they're parents now, and it's been 20 years, and they're definitely taking the back seat to their children in this book, and I thought that would make me very sad. But I should have known better because they actually all got like very decent cameos, and we definitely saw a good amount of them that made me satisfied. But it was a very smooth transition to giving their children the forefront of the story, and that's not even to mention that their children are just so compelling, and they all grew up together because their parents were very close, so they all were just always together growing up. They went to school together. We're really dropped into this story where all of these characters, and there's a lot of them, it does take an adjustment period to kind of recognize who's who, but you're just dropped in on these characters with established relationships. Some of them don't like each other, some of them are best friends, some of them are in relationships, some of them have crushes on each other, and then their crush has a crush on someone else, and there's just so much going on, and it's just, I don't know, it was just such an experience, and it was all done so well in my eyes. The second reason that I really think that I like this book is that simply Cassandra Clare's writing, when she is writing her prequel novels that take place in a different time, completely different to our world right now, she has better writing. She has better writing in those books because those characters are in a different world. They walk differently, they talk differently than we do now, and it's all just a bit more stylized, and it's more poetic, and it's more lyrical than how we talk now. And I don't know if I just like historical fiction, that might be it. It just had more flavor for me. I can say that goes for both the Infernal Devices and the Last Hours, what we have of it. So now let's finally move into the Dark Artifices trilogy. So this is the most recent finished Shadowhunter series. This series is the one that I feel like a lot of people who want to start the Shadowhunters Chronicles, they really want to read this series because it's the most recent. And a lot of people ask if they can start the Shadowhunters Chronicles with this series. And to that I would answer that yeah, you can do whatever you want, but if I'm going to compare this to the MCU, I would definitely say that if you read the Dark Artifices without the context of everything that happens in the Mortal Instruments, it will be like watching Avengers Endgame without watching Infinity War. You see these characters suffering the consequences of the events of the previous installment, but if you go into that movie alone, you don't know what exactly happened except for the few mentions that are mentioned throughout. So let's get into the first book, Lady Midnight. I rated this book 4.5 stars. As I said in the City of Heavenly Fire portion, I loved what I saw from Emma and Julian and the Blackthorn family. Forming that bond with them in that book made this book so much sweeter because we got to see them 5 years later. They're a little bit more grown up, and we just got to see how they're living now after the crazy, horrible things that they went through in that book. Going into this book, I was already loving it, but the actual book itself was just so amazing. I loved the very local feel of this book. So this takes place, as I said before, in the LA Institute, and just the atmosphere is just so inviting in this book. We just get so much of like the beach and the sunshine of California, and Emma and Julian driving along the Pacific Coast Highway with their windows down and Emma's feet on the dashboard or whatever. Like, it was just, everything was just so atmospheric, and I felt like I was there with them. It just felt like more of a personal experience than the Mortal Instruments did, because New York City is so big and it's so unlike any other big city, but LA is more like the city that I'm from, so I felt a little bit more at home and a little bit more cozy in this setting. That just made the book so much more enjoyable for me overall. Emma and Julian are, without a doubt, Cassandra Clare's most successful execution of a forbidden love trope. Forbidden love is Cassandra Clare's thing. Like, it's in every single series, in every single book, in a different way. It manifests itself in different ways, but she just completely bombed that with Jason Clary. Like, no one's getting behind that forbidden love. Like, let's be real here. But Emma and Julian had history. They had a legit reason that their love was forbidden, and seeing their push and pull together and their tension and seeing it all climax literally was just really a moment to be alive. Their love story is just so beautiful, and this is my favorite Dark Artifices book. I'm just gonna say it right now, right off the bat. All of the characters had very clear motivations and arcs, and the plot line was very, very linear, and you could see where it was going to end up. Everything was headed in a very clear direction. I just appreciated that, and I think that that's why this is my favorite in the series. Lord of Shadows, book 2, I rated this book 4 out of 5 stars. So this was a good book as well. As most of Cassandra Clare's sequels are, this book definitely focused more on relationship building and getting a little bit more depth for those characters in their relationships. We got more of Kit and Ty in this book, and then we obviously got some Kieran, Mark, Christina, and they are my favorite part of this series. Obviously, if you know anything about me, they are my favorite part. However, some of the plot points that were introduced in this book, aka the cohort, some of those plot points were just not my cup of tea, but they didn't take over this book. This book was definitely still dealing with stuff that happened in the first book. I was really liking it. Emma and Julian's back and forth was continued in this book to a good level, and that was my main interest from book one. The Shakespearean tragedy that was the last 5 pages of this book was absolutely horrible. I unfortunately did get spoiled for the deaths that occur at the end of this book, but it was absolutely nothing in the face of actually reading those events and how it all unfolded, and it was very traumatic for me. The ending to this book is just traumatic. So Queen of Air and Darkness, the final book in the Dark Artifices trilogy and the final book that I will be talking about. I hate to leave it off on a bad note, but here we are. So I rated Queen of Air and Darkness 3 out of 5 stars. Now that's not a bad rating at all, but just wait. So this book, or any book in this series rather, was not from the beginning going to get anything less than a 3 stars from me because of how invested I already was in all of the characters, in all of the relationships they had with each other. It just wasn't happening. Like, I'm not rating a book lower than 3 stars if I'm still that invested in its characters, which are the most important part of any book to me. However, if I was rating this book on plot alone, I would like maybe give it 1.5 stars. I hated the execution of the plot in this book. I hated how pretty much everything unfolded. I really disliked the sheer amount of plot threads that were opened up in this book for no reason. Like, literally for no reason. They could have been cut out, so many of them. And I'm not saying that all of the things in this book didn't end up making sense in the end, because I guess they did, but they were just so unnecessary. The alternate universe part, why? For what? For what reason did we have to do that? If I wanted to read about Sebastian Morgenstern and the Undarkened, I would simply go pick up City of Heavenly Fire, which is a book that I have already read. I just simply disagreed with the overall direction that this book took in the end. I also was quite underwhelmed with how the Parabatai curse plotline was solved. I didn't like it, to put it plainly. Also, the cohort storyline was so annoying to me. It was so unnecessary to me. I see enough of Trump and his rallies and his supporters in real life, so I don't understand why Cassandra Clare thought that I would need to see this being represented in the Shadowhunter world. I just didn't need it. I didn't need to see it. I live it every day, and it was not exciting to me. It was not life-changing to me. It was not a message that I needed in my life that I haven't gotten time and time again before. I don't know, like, this book was just, it was just not it for me. And like, it was 880 pages long, so that kind of sucks. So final thoughts on the Dark Artifices series. I really love the beginning of it. I really love all of the characters that are in this series. I really am interested to see what happens with Kit and Ty. I love Kieran, Mark, and Christina, even though I hope that they can be together in a better capacity in the future. I didn't really love their ending either. Overall, this series really appealed to me on like a fan level. Like, it had a lot of tropes that I love. I've been reading fan fiction for years, and this series definitely had a lot of fan fiction-y type tropes, so I really see the potential in this series. Possibly could have been my favorite series because I love the aesthetic of it and I love the atmosphere, and I love a lot about it, but it just doesn't really live up to the Infernal Devices and The Last Hours for me. So it is officially getting dark outside. I've been sitting here talking for very long, and that is my review of every single Shadowhunters book. So final thoughts. I am now a Shadowhunter stan, if you couldn't tell already. I will be sticking around for every single future release of a Shadowhunters book, and yeah, hopefully the world doesn't end before then. Fingers crossed. Oh god. I'm so tired. Links to my social media in the description. Hope you like this video. I'm gonna go knock out and not wake up for 12 hours. I will see you in the next video whenever that is. Peace out.